Let's explore what it's really like to be enlightened. This evening's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit. What happens when enlightenment is achieved? So this is a series of, I think, three questions, which are actually compound questions. And the person begins with actually two questions. Is enlightenment a fundamental change in your perception of reality, or is it just a state of being where you're really clear-minded? This is kind of funny because it's asking the same thing synonymously, which is cute. It's funny. I remember when I was sniffing around enlightenment many decades ago, and I wanted to be like Neo in the final reel of the first Matrix movie. I really, really did. And so perhaps you can imagine my surprise when I learned that the highest lamas of Tibet referred to enlightenment as, quote-unquote, nothing special. You see, enlightenment is nothing more than the mastery of the Eightfold Path. But what do we mean by mastery? When I was a child, I found the prospect of tying my shoes to be daunting. Much time and tears and repeat instructions later. At last, by the time first grade approached, I had gotten so good at tying my shoes that I could do so spontaneously, habitually, easily, and effectively. If you have the good fortune to find a good teacher to help you to really understand and then master the Eightfold Path, then everything else will take care of itself. The seventh fold of the Eightfold Path is mindfulness, where we notice things, you see, every time we breathe, and I'm going to go to an illustration here to make more sense of this. This is unfortunate. Let me do a quick... I'm going to quickly hit wrap text and click in front. Okay. Every time we oopsie, wow, I'm having a tough time with this bad boy, aren't I? Okay. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, we access our sympathetic nervous system, ensconced within the thoracic region of our spinal cord. It is evolved to perceive, and to do so vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. That's right. During each inhalation, thanks to our sympathetic nervous system, we are wired to perceive sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. We are wired to perceive them softly, or sharply, or stably, or unstably. We're wired to perceive emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We are able to perceive an entire spectrum of phenomena, from the external to the internal, from the physical to the mental, from the pleasurable to the painful, from the interesting to the boring, from the glorious to the grotesque. Enlightenment is not about picking and choosing what we experience. It is not about picking and choosing what we perceive. It's about perceiving as we mentioned, vulnerably, passively, viscerally, and randomly. Now, to those of us who are traversing Yang's path of being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel, that could be terrifying. But for those of us who are drawn to the path of being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, then the actual constraints of mindfulness could seem tantalizing. Whether we know it or not, whether we intend to or not, we are already perceptive entities. It's just a question of whether or not our brain is cooperating with our sympathetic nervous system or living in opposition to it. Here's a quick tool of the trade. Our brain is a lot like Urkel from Family Ties. Urkel might be a klutz, and he might be annoying, but he's got a sharp intellect and a heart of gold, much like our brain. And if we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the demonstrative pronoun this during each inhalation, we'll find that our brain is living in cooperation with our sympathetic nervous system. So we come now to the next question. How long does it take to attain enlightenment, and can everyone do it? That's an excellent question. In the penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha taught that his path could be mastered in less than 7 years, or 7 quarters, or 7 months, or 7 fortnights, or 7 weeks, or even 7 days. It's been my experience that most of us have not lived in the culture where Bengali crease counting is the norm, and we have not lived in a culture where sitting cross-legged upon a cushion on the floor is the norm. So for those of us not raised in the Iron Age, but the Bronze Age, it can be difficult. And so for most people who have no experience crease counting or floor sitting, I'd say that there's a chart that could explain that to you. And so I'm going to do my best to turn to it momentarily. Here we go. Assuming you have a good teacher who recognizes that the earliest Buddhist statuary does not feature the full lotus position, but simply one lower leg resting upon the other. If you have the good fortune to come across a teacher who knows that the knees are just hinge joints, and that the lowering of the thighs comes from the hips, just like it does in ballet, and that they do not need to be forced, but that gravity can do the work for us. If you're fortunate enough to have a good teacher, who is able to explain to you that we don't have to force ourselves to sit up straight. Every time we breathe in, whether we know it or not, we are already wired to generate a vertical traction between our tush and our head. And also, every time we exhale, we are already wired to relax that traction. And so we don't have to force that. All we need to do is simply get out of our own way. Assuming you have the good fortune to acquire a blanket upon which to sit and to rest your knees and your shins, and a cushion upon which to rest your tuchas, you can sit. You could set aside 5 minutes every 12 hours or so the first week. The second week, you could set aside 10 minutes every 12 hours or so. The third week, you could set aside 15 minutes every 12 hours or so. Now, if you're really clever, you'll simply set a timer on your smartphone. You might even tune into my live stream. I broadcast every 12 hours, and if for some reason you don't live in this, your time zone is not in coordination with my time zone, YouTube does a very good job of saving my live streams. And so, progressing 5 minutes a week, by the conclusion of the 15th week, sitting for a 15-minute lesson and a 60 minutes meditation could become rather easy because you progressed gradually over the span of 15 weeks. And the change has been less disruptive to your body, to your mind, to your pets, to your people, to your partner, to your children, to your friends, to your co-workers, because it's been gradual and incremental. It has been disruptive to no one in particular. And so, yes, if you come to class, alive or pre-recorded, and if you apply the instructions you've been given, and when you have questions, if you ask those questions, either during class in the chat window or after class in the commentary, as specifically as you can, and then you apply the answers you receive to those questions, there's absolutely no reason why you could not master the Buddha's Eightfold Path by the conclusion of the 15th week. Welcome aboard, Kevin. It is always a delight to hang out with you. No worries. I understand life gets in the way, and thank you for the generosity. Please give my love to Jay and Ro and Teddy, and of course, the spirit of Charlotte. Returning to this evening's questions. What meditations would you recommend to someone who's trying to achieve enlightenment? And then part 2, should I actively try to achieve enlightenment, or would that be reductive? Both excellent questions. So here's been my experience. The 7th of the Eightfold Path is meditation. Well, what do I mean by that? So, by way of review, every time we inhale, whether we mean to or not, whether we try to or not, whether we know it or not, boy, I'm just beating up this microphone, we notice things. We notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like. We notice emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. We notice things, be they external or internal, physical or mental, pleasurable or painful, interesting or boring, glorious or grotesque. Whatever are we to do with that which we notice? Fortunately, every time we exhale, whether we know it or not, we access the parasympathetic nervous system ensconced within both the lower lumbar region of our spinal cord as well as the tippy top of the cervical region that some people describe either as the brainstem or the I'm trouble with this word. It starts with the letter R, not rectangular. Rectangular activation system. The word will come to me hopefully by tomorrow. But anyway, there's all sorts of fancy words. This area right here. The long and short of it is this. Every time we exhale, we're wired for both physical relaxation and mental release. Now, remember how we talked about the brain is like Urkel. And although it's not malicious, it can step on its own dick. So fortunately, if we ask our brain to silently and mentally recite the one-syllable verb ease during each exhalation, we'll find that the brain and all of its resources stop opposing our parasympathetic nervous system and in fact begin to cooperate with it. So now we know about mindfulness and meditation. So here's a seldom shared secret of the Buddha's path. Mindfulness and meditation are the dynamo that turn the shafts and gears and pulleys of the metaphoric Enlightenment machine. Mindfulness and meditation make possible the sixth fold of the Buddha's path, effortless effort. Mindfulness makes possible the first fold. That happens once in a while. Yay! Thank you, Kevin. So, what is meant by right view of change? Simply this. Sometimes change is comforting. Often change is scary, whether it is subtle or whether it is jarring. And yet, despite our best efforts to ignore it, we can't help but notice change. We notice change in our visual field, in our auditory field, in our experience of the sensual. We notice change in our experience of the gustatory. We notice change in our experience of the olfactory and the like. We notice change in our emotions. They change every few minutes at least. We notice change in our intentions. We notice changes in our thoughts. This moment we're thinking about breakfast. Next moment we're thinking about world peace. We notice changes in our recollections. First we're recalling our first doggy. Then we're recalling, what we saw on TV last night. Our imaginings are also changing. So all that we perceive is subject to change. This requires no belief, no advanced degree in philosophy. We cannot help but notice change. The funny thing is that the more change that we notice, the more it becomes obvious that grasping is foolish. Ever changing one and all, there is nothing permanent to grasp, and that in turn becomes a feedback loop, strengthening our meditation, our physical relaxation, our mental release. 50% of the Buddha's Eightfold Path pertains to loving kindness. If we have the very bad luck to have a teacher who tells us to concentrate and to actively concentrate and actively analyze, we'll be overworking our prefrontal cortex just behind our forehead. And its structures, such as the medial prefrontal cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, overworking the prefrontal cortex at first causes our blood to collect at our amygdala, the seat of aggression and anxiety in the metaphoric dungeon of our limbic system. Prolonged taxation of our prefrontal cortex can cause us to present with the symptoms of depression, and nobody wants that. But here's the good news. When we give our prefrontal cortex a relaxing break and instead rely upon the sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system to practice mindfulness and meditation, then all that blood that collected down here in our amygdala shifts to this thing that kind of looks a little bit like a baseball mitt. Oh, sure, the big kids call it the anterior cingulate gyrus. I think it was the reticular activation system. I think that's the phrase I was looking for. Anyway, so this anterior cingulate gyrus functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. So, the mindfulness and meditation that use our inhalation and our exhalation to access our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems is the font of the loving kindness that comprises 50% of the Buddha's path. Let's take a deeper look at that. The second fold of the Eightfold Path is right aspiration, also known as wishing love. You might consider this to be the essence of mental morality. Karma Jigme Rinpoche taught that this was the essence of the Bodhisattva vow. What am I looking for? Oh, yes. Right. Communicate, or I should say, kind communication could be considered the essence of interpersonal morality. Kind conduct could be considered the essence of physical morality. Again, Karma Jigme taught that the essence of all the hundreds of pratimoksha vows all distills down to nonviolence. The fifth fold of the Eightfold Path, kind commerce, The fifth fold of the Eightfold Path kind commerce could be considered to be circumstantial morality. All it means is simply this. We stop being Karen and stop trying to get people fired. And we stop trying to be a Chad and drive other businesses out of business. We replace our cruelty and competition with kindness and cooperation. There's enough resources. Did you know that there is enough resources right now, and there is enough technology right now to ensure that every man, woman, and child receives adequate food, shelter, medical attention, education, employment in harmony with their talents and interests, and the like? We have the technology, we have the resources physically, but we lack, as a people, as a species, the will. Oh, how wonderful it would be that by simply mastering this path, we become a beacon to others. The more humans who are defined by loving kindness, peace, and wisdom, the more humans are going to do right by other beings. So, our friends, the second part of our friend's final question is this. Should I try to achieve enlightenment, or would that be reductive? There is such a thing that I quote far too often, known as Sturgeon's Law. Paraphrased, I paraphrase it thusly. 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. Therefore, it should come as little surprise that 90% of teachers are terrible. 90% of teachers are not fully realized. They have not mastered the path. They do not understand the teachings. And rather than being honest and vulnerable, they bluff. They bullshit. They tell people, they speak in riddles, or they scold people for asking questions, or they tell people that the reason they're not enlightened is because they're trying too hard. When did the Buddha ever say don't try hard? That's science fiction. The dialects on Doctor Who might say don't try too hard, but not the Buddha. The Buddha said that we should try in a manner that is energetic, and joyful and peaceful. In other words, we should strive in a manner that is non-neurotic and sustainable. Did you know that if you make the mastery of the Buddha's Eightfold Path your goal, then enlightenment will be a foregone conclusion? It will become, in the words of Agent Smith from the first Matrix movie, an inevitability. Do you hear that sound, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability. I'm going to change that. That is the sound of your impending liberation. So, with all apologies to the Wachowski siblings. So anyway, so there you have it. Enthusiastically practice the advice I've given you tonight. Come to my live streams as often as you please. And do not be surprised when you become the person that your dog already thinks you are. Now listen, you'll still experience the full spectrum of perceptions, the full spectrum of emotions, the full spectrum of intentions, the full spectrum of thoughts, the full spectrum of memories, the full spectrum of imaginings. The first of 7 enlightenment factors is mindfulness. The path to enlightenment is paved with mindfulness. Therefore, we should not expect a diminishment in mindfulness once we're enlightened. The problem with enlightenment is that you're aware of everything, the good and the bad, the interesting and the boring, the glorious and the grotesque, the pleasurable and the painful. So what you feel is not an indictment. What you feel does not define you. But what you do with what you feel, that's the rub. I do look forward to exploring the fine details of practice with you, and after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I've spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering the teachings and techniques of each sect of Buddhism so that you would not have to. Welcome, my friends, to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. Come, let us play with the latest iteration of Green Heroine's Easy Meditation. Described in Sanskrit as let's start with Tibetan. It's described in Tibetan as Drol Zhang. Described in Sanskrit as Shyamatara. Translated into English as Green Heroine. Those upon the path of being rigid, fearful, and controlling might view her as an entity to be worshipped and supplicated. However, upon this path of being flexible, loving, and laid back, we simply view Green Heroine as an archetype whose iconography reminds us of love and letting go. So we're going to play with these 3 sets of exercises. And we're going to probably take at least 1.5 laps. Let's start with love and letting go. Just as a sprinter does not walk out of the car and immediately put their feet in the starter's blocks, but first they'll warm up. Similarly, you and I can warm up with a set of 8 passive contemplations. Let's begin with the first 4 right now, where we bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the practice of love and letting go. Remember, the moment you have a specific question about Buddhist chanting, Buddhist meditation, Buddhist philosophy, or how to apply them, simply type your question in great detail in the chat window. Together. Rather than indulge or controlling tendencies, breath of follies of active visualization, emotion, magic, and belief, we could just recite these kind words in harmony with our breathing and allow our subconscious to do the heavy lifting. Oh, how that worked out quite fortuitously. Splendid. Let us sidestep the rigidity that confuses metaphors for statements literal, and relax into the flexibility that savors the chance explaining metaphors as similes. Let's begin by reviewing the meaning of the mantra. Together. O Mama Chatara, the swift and courageous, you drive away all fears with tutorem. Heroin fulfilling all hands with today with a syllable, so how may it be so? So we're going to begin with a rather wordy wish. Now remember, it's not our job to actively visualize or believe or emote. We just simply play with these words, and that's enough. Just playing with these words exercises the neural pathways responsible for empathy. Together. May all minds of all beings now be as peacefully enlightened as the mind of a real or imagined Buddha symbolized by a articulate one syllable seed or bija mantra. So we're taking all these words and we're squishing them down into just 6 syllables that we're going to recite silently, mentally, and passively as we inhale. As we exhale, please physically relax as best you can while striving to chant these 10 syllables 4 times per breath. I would very much like to play with this exercise for 4 rounds. But what's a round? A round is simply 1 inhalation followed by 1 exhalation. I'm going to count 4 rounds by advancing the tip of my left thumb during each inhalation, allowing it to come to rest upon these sets of creases upon my left little finger, and then eventually its tip. And I invite you to follow along with me. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Together. May all relationships or speech of all beings now be as joyfully loving as a real or imagined Buddha's communication symbolized by the 10 syllable heart mantra. So there is the idea that this circle of syllables forms a horizontal ring at the heart of the archetype of enlightenment. This time I'm going to count the next set, the second collection of 4 rounds upon my left ring finger. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Whoops, I got confused. Sorry about that. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. May all bodies or forms of all beings now enjoy the beautiful Halcyon and Buddhist statuary, depicting the blissful body of a real or imagined deva or yadaman archetype of enlightenment, such as green heroine. Oh, I must check something real quick. Okay, it's still there. Excellent. So let's count an additional 4 breaths upon our left middle finger. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Hey Ronald, how you doing, man? Together as a team, let's chant. May all circumstances or lots of all beings now have their good fortune open. As a Buddha's real or imagined paradise for land of Vati. So let us count an additional 4 breaths upon our left index finger. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. Om da de de da de do de so wa. So congratulations, you've counted 16 breaths on 4 fingers and 1 thumb. But did you know that on your right hand, you could count sets of 16? So we just accomplished our first set of 16 breaths. And now we're going to prepare for our second set, oopsie, our second set of 16 breaths. We come now, so we've just completed our first set of 4 passive contemplations. Simultaneously, we collected 64 recitations of the 10-syllable mantra, which was kind of fun. Now let us bring those same 4 bases of mindfulness into the figurative practice of the rainbow body, which sounds ridiculously mysterious, doesn't it? Together. All visible circumstances or lots could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this body or form. Notice how gently this verbiage is. We're not saying this is how it is. We're saying, well, it could be that way. We're using the verb melt as a metaphor of impermanence, and we're using the verb absorb as a metaphor of interdependence. When I was a kid, back in the 70s or late 60s, we would use squeeze butter, squeeze margarine on our hot waffles and watch them absorb in. Little did I know that was interdependence. Just like before, we're going to take all these words and crush them. We're going to crush their heads. Kevin, let me know if you're a fan of Kids in the Hall. During our in-breath, we could silently and mentally recite, "Seen lots melt." During our exhalation, we could silently and mentally recite, "Into form." So here's the irony. Our circumstances are seen, yet impermanent. Our circumstances are seen, yet as non-graspable as a vast, empty void. Together. All sensual bodies or forms could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this hot speech. We've been contemplating our forms are sensual, yet non-graspable. All resounding interpersonal speech could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if it could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this hot mind. Let us contemplate how our speech is resounding, yet non-graspable. All lucid minds could be as impermanent and interdependent as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into our vast empty void. Like the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although tantalizing to the eye, could be not graspable to the hand. So now we're going to contemplate how minds are clear yet non-graspable. And by clear we mean minds are capable of clearly perceiving, emoting, intending, reasoning, recalling, and imagining. And now we're going to play. Un momento. So we've just finished our second set of 16 breaths, and we've just completed our second set right here of 16 breaths. And so now we've got 14 remaining sets of 16 breaths ahead of us. And we could use those 16 sets, we could use those 16 sets practicing the technique mentioned during class. Wherein we bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go. When we remember an injustice done to us, our job is not to plan revenge. Our job is not to make excuses, justifying, minimizing, and rationalizing what was done to us. Our job is simply to notice as we breathe in, even though it's grotesque, and to relax as best we can as we breathe out. If we do that, that's enough. As promised, together as a team, we've completed our first lap. Let's start our second lap. So let's bring, once again, the 4 bases of mindfulness into the practice of love and letting go. So we're going to play with the 4 bases of mindfulness, being the circumstantial, the physical, the interpersonal, and the mental. So before we verbally recited the 10-syllable mantra, now we're going to silently and mentally recite the 1-syllable mantra or seed mantra, Tom. During our inhalation, we're going to silently and mentally recite Tom. During our exhalation, as our breath leaves our body, our intention that all beings everywhere master the path of wisdom also leaves our body. Let's chant. May all relationships or speech of all beings now be as joyfully loving as a real or imagined Buddha's communication symbolized by the 10-syllable heart mantra. May all bodies or forms of all beings now enjoy the beautiful health seen in Buddha's statuary, depicting the blissful body of a real or imagined deva or yadaman archetype of enlightenment such as green heroine. May all circumstances or lots of all beings know have the good fortune or boon. As a Buddha's real or imagined paradise, spirit land or Vanti. Now let us bring the 4 bases of mindfulness into the figurative path of the rainbow body. All visible circumstances or lots could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this body or form. All sensual bodies or forms could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this whole speech. I just had an idea. Nope, that won't work. Okay. All resounding interpersonal speech could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if it could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into this hot mind. All lucid minds could be as impermanent and interdependent, as if they could blissfully melt into rainbow light that could delightfully absorb into our vast empty void. Like the illusion of the infinite azure sky on a bright and beautiful cloudless morn, which, although tantalizing to the eye, could be non-graspable to the hand. Oops. Again, let us bring whatever we spontaneously notice into the path of awareness and letting go. Let us chant refuge, bodhicitta, refuge and bowing. BRB. In our compassion may we long to free all beings from the toxic tyranny of ever. Hating, craving, and clinging, metaphorically known as the three mental poisons. In our pragmatism may all liberation of all others be fueled by your reliance on the Buddha's example, instructions, and students, described by the metaphor of the three wish-fulfilling jewels. Having sat for the better part of 75 minutes, you may find it refreshing to knock out a dozen or two geriatric step-back squat thrusts, but I assure you it's entirely up to you. Whew. Before, after. May we free all through the three jewels. 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 Whew. Let us seal this evening's practice by chanting love and letting go's wishes for universal enlightenment and well-being. May all minds of all beings lucid yet void no be as enlightened as a Buddha's mind symbolized by a one-syllable bija. May all speech of all beings resounding yet void no be as loving as a Buddha speech symbolized by a multi-syllable mantra. May all forms of all beings sensual yet void no be as healthy as a yet archetype depicted in Buddha statuary. May all forms of all beings appearing yet void no be as fortunate as a pure land of law represented in Buddhist paintings. If you feel that I have earned it, you could give this live stream a thumbs up. You could even help support this channel. In approximately 10 1/3 hours, I would very much like to return to lead tomorrow's early meditation class and group practice. And if you are as geeky as me, may the Fourth be with you always.